41st gene key, the Prime Emanation. Programming partner, 31st gene key. Codon ring, the ring of origin, 41. Physiology, adrenals. Amino acid, methionine, initiator. The 41st shadow, fantasy, the genetic wheel of samsara. The 41st gene key and its various frequencies comprise a truly remarkable archetype. It stands alone within the human genetic matrix with a very important function. It relates to what is known in genetics as the start codon. Since this is such an important gene key, it may help to understand exactly what it means. If a section of genetic code is transcribed into letters, the genetic code can be made up of combinations of only 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. These letters are called bases and represent the basic building blocks of the entire code. Hidden within these billions of letters are specific instructions for the body to follow. In deciphering the code of life, scientists discovered that there were places within the sequence where the body always seemed to know to begin building. They found that whenever the body sees the letters A, T, G in a sequence, it always acts on the instructions that follow. Thus, they call this the start codon because it operates like a front door key into the code itself. As a genetic archetype of functioning within human consciousness, the 41st gene key's message is of huge import to us all. At the shadow level of consciousness, the 41st gene key centers around the issue of fantasy and dreams. Being in the thrall of the 41st shadow of fantasy is like holding the key to your dreams in your hand, but never turning it in the lock. Whether you have this 41st shadow in your hologenetic profile or not, you are undoubtedly available for its influence, because like all the shadows, it exerts its greatest power through the collective frequency of the planet. It is because of this 41st shadow that our planet is populated by people who dream of a better life, but who, for one reason or another, are unable to bring these dreams into reality. The 41st shadow creates a continual pressure within humans. It is the pressure to evolve. When this pressure is distorted by a low frequency field, as is the current state of humanity, it becomes distorted into the pressure to feel happy. Thus begins what the ancients named the Wheel of Samsara, an endless cycle of suffering in which humans become trapped by the need to satisfy their desires. With the mass distortion of the 41st shadow, it is as though the body of humanity has misread the instructions left within its collective DNA. It all begins here, in this gene key. It is not desire itself that is the problem, because desire, the 30th shadow, comes after fantasy. Fantasy is the spark that ignites the fuel of the desire. So how is it that we have misread such a vital code within our nature? And is there anything we can do about it? There are many answers to be found within the higher frequencies of this gene key, as you shall see. For the moment, let us try and see how this shadow works and how effectively it keeps human consciousness from flowering. The key to the problem, as ever, lies within your mind. The evolutionary pressure that surges up in human beings carries our entire genetic history within it. That is, our evolution all the way from amoeba to Homo sapiens. Over half of your genetic code derives from other organisms from an earlier evolution. All this history carries an enormous weight inside you. In one sense, it drags you down, but in another, it urges you to want to break free. To face the pressure of all this past inside you takes enormous courage, and as you let it in, you want to run and distract yourself away from it in any way possible. Because of the ancestral weight carried by this shadow, it has a deep connection to human appetite and energy. This deeply uncomfortable pressure, coming straight out of the 41st shadow, causes us to literally hunger for a better future. By the same token, it has connections with eating, not eating and depression. The distortion of the 41st shadow can lead to all manner of weight problems and energy problems, from chronic fatigue to hyperactivity. All of these issues are ultimately rooted in the mind and its ability or inability to fantasize about the future. This shadow constantly shuffles between the dream of being full and the urge to be empty. When the gauge reads empty, you fantasize about being full. Whether that means dreaming of meeting your perfect soulmate, having lots of money, or devouring a bar of chocolate depends upon your individual mind and its conditioning. Conversely, when the gauge reads full, you can sink into heaviness in which you feel weighed down by your past and you experience the urge to purge. The shadow of fantasy prevents you from feeling complete because the mind doesn't rest in the now, but swings between dreaming of the future and rehashing the past. However, the greatest problem with this shadow is that it prevents you from actually fulfilling your dreams. You become addicted to the hope that the dream brings to your mind, rather than actually launching off in the direction of the dream. This is a major reason why people live off the fantasies provided by their culture, the movies or alternative realities created through technology and the internet, which have become humanity's latest great fantasy addiction. The 41st gene key is also always involved with issues of leadership. The leader that knows how to manipulate fantasy can have enormous impact over others. The programming partner to the 41st gene key is the 31st gene key, with its shadow of arrogance. This 31st gene key's theme of leadership is marred at the shadow level by false humility, which is really the same thing as arrogance. True leaders have to overcome a deep fear of humiliation, because when the 41st gene key declares its dreams aloud and stands behind them, they risk being very easily misunderstood. Those who bring the new into the world have always faced this challenge. In conclusion then, the 41st shadow of fantasy sets up the great Maya or illusion in which most human beings live. As a primary evolutionary pressure, it triggers a false start into a mental representation of your life, thereby short-circuiting your ability to live in the present moment. Fantasy itself is a beautiful thing, but if it prevents you from really living, it becomes an escape from life into the mind. Once you have become trapped in these addictive mental patterns, it is very difficult to recognize them and break out of them. However, in every turn of the wheel of fantasy, as the cycles of your life periodically reset themselves, there is that chance that the next time round, the code will be correctly interpreted. When this happens to you, you will engage the true start codon rather than its shadow. Instead of escaping back into the vicious cycle of fantasy and hope, your higher purpose will be unleashed and will manifest in the world. Repressive nature. Dreamy. The repressive nature of the 41st shadow is about escaping life through dreaminess. These people have an agenda that is dictated by fantasy. They really do not live in the real world. Whatever you say to such people, they will interpret it through their dream. Such people do not actually want to fulfill their dreams, but are addicted to the inner world created by their minds. They are governed by deep-seated fear that doesn't allow them to have proper human relationships. This dreaminess often presents as a kind of lethargy that gives rise to the gradual breakdown of the energetic systems within the body, in particular the vascular and the digestive systems. The only way for these people to break out of their mental cycle is to begin manifesting their dreams on the material plane. Reactive nature, hyperactive. The reactive nature of this shadow can be a sheer bundle of nervous energy. These people are always ahead of themselves, being absolutely carried away on the fuel of their dreams. This kind of nature inevitably leads to burnout, as the power of the fantasy they are trying to bring into the world outstrips the limitations of the material plane. Their insatiable hunger drives them into deeper and deeper problems, whilst placing enormous pressure on their nervous system. The inevitable breakdown of such a nature is often highly dramatic and destructive for anyone else involved. The hope for these people pivots upon their ability to allow others into their inner life and relinquishing their one-pointed obsession with manifesting their dream exactly as it appears inside their minds. The 41st gift, anticipation, the ring of origin. As we saw with the 41st shadow, this gene key represents the basic pressure to evolve, to seek out new pastures and new experiences. This evolutionary impulse is the secret to the 41st gift, the gift of anticipation. There is an interesting phenomenon that occurs the more you raise the frequency, passing in and out of your DNA. You become more and more sensitive to the hidden properties in the world around you. One of the things you become particularly aware of is the presence of morphogenetic fields. Morphogenetic fields were first postulated by the scientist Rupert Sheldrake, but many older cultures have spoken of such energy fields throughout history. Essentially, a morphogenetic field is an invisible energy grid that communicates specific information across time and space. Depending on your sensitivity, you can pick up information about the past or the future from the field. The 41st gift is a particularly special gift. As higher frequencies begin to operate through this gene key, it picks up very specific information from the morphogenetic field. Every one of the 64 gene keys operates out of a particular morphogenetic field. For example, the programming partner of this gift, the 31st gift of leadership, attunes itself to all higher frequency leaders on this planet, even inspirational leaders from our collective past. Each gene key draws strength and power from those who have come before, and at the same time also attunes to those who have not yet been born. It may explain why certain people seem to have premonitions about the future. Both of these gifts, anticipation, 41, and leadership, 31, operate together, one reinforcing the other. The greatest leaders are those who build upon the past and anticipate what is coming. Likewise, people with the gift of anticipation are naturally held up as leaders. The 41st gift has a single genetic agenda. It is always attuned to the next evolutionary energetic grid that is waiting to descend into form. Behind it are hidden the blueprints of evolution itself. Which blueprint it picks up depends upon the level of frequency and the person's cultural conditioning and geography. We pick up different blueprints in different places, and as our frequency rises, the more details we see. Premonitions sometimes occur to people when their body receives a sudden surge of frequency through a shock or through being in a particular place with a very strong morphogenetic field. Most occult phenomena are the result of sudden electromagnetic surges through the 41st gene key. These impulses are often misinterpreted when the surge quickly dies back and the shadow frequency regains its grip on the vehicle. The mind paints its own fantasy of what it just experienced, and people can interpret these sensations and impressions in very diverse ways, from ghosts to past lives. When you are able to maintain a high frequency through this 41st gift, you will be able to literally download all manner of beautiful things from the morphogenetic field. All works of genius emerge from this field. Mozart is a fine example of a man with a strongly activated 41st gift. His ability to read the completed scores of all his finest works straight from the morphogenetic field is well documented, although it may not have been described in this kind of language before. Mozart was born into a world of music and was intensively tutored by his own father, one of Europe's leading musical masters. It is unsurprising, then, that Mozart picked up on the burgeoning musical morphogenetic field of his era, now known as the classical style. He anticipated its maturation and manifested it in the material plane. This is the real difference between the 41st gift and the 41st shadow. It is the difference between genius and non-genius. Genius manifests, whilst non-genius dreams. Since the start codon and its amino acid methionine are only coded by this single 41st gene key, it has a remarkable place within the system of chemical rings known as the codon rings. The 21 codon rings are threaded together as chemical chains that relay biological information between each other in a fractal manner. This method of information relay means that the body can essentially operate like a quantum biocomputer, organizing multiple levels of information in response to stimulus from the inner and outer environment. Within this interlinked ring system, the 20 amino acids can be combined and recombined to create all manner of chemistries within the body. Nested in the heart of the ring matrix sits the 41st gene key, the ring of origin, pulsing with the source code that it then transmits to the networks of codon rings. Even though we may look at DNA as a double helix with the 4 bases strung out along a line of code, its actual functioning within the body as a whole is in no way linear. The implications of this are astounding. Every single start codon inside every single cell of your body is electromagnetically linked to each other. This is the foundation of the holographic body, which in turn is linked electromagnetically to the holographic universe. Every impulse inside you is therefore communicated to the whole, just as every impulse within the whole is chemically mirrored in your DNA. Once you have discovered the knack of influencing your own DNA, you can literally reprogram every cell within your body. However, in order to activate secret chemical formulae inside your body that accompany the highest states of consciousness, you must learn to overcome the inertia of humanity as a whole. This is the domain of the 41st Siddhi. The 41st Siddhi. Emanation, the Ouroboros. As we have examined the 41st gene key, we have risen to the awareness wherein the physical body can be seen as a holographic mirror of the universe, the source of which is this very gene key. When we extend this model at a macrocosmic level to its ultimate frequency, we reach something both spectacular and terrifying. The question is, what does the cosmic start codon look like, and what does it mean to arrive at the source of all being? As the source of being, the 41st Siddhi is the Siddhi of emanation. Emanation is a word that has been used by many ancient metaphysical and mystical systems as a means for understanding something that is really unapproachable. One of the best known of these systems is perhaps the Kabbalah, whose central tenet is a map known as the doctrine of emanation. In a nutshell, the doctrine of emanation points towards a fractal model of the universe in which everything emerges infinitely as a mirror image of itself. The Kabbalists use the symbol of 10 spheres or sphira, one emanating from another, to represent the various levels of spirit descending into matter. The ultimate source, known as the Ein Sof, represents the unnameable, inconceivable, limitless light from which all else emanates. Although the Kabbalah is an incredible model of the universe with many different uses and dimensions, it remains a flawed model because all models are flawed by the limitation of language. No language is able to approach this word, emanation. It is a word that contains the concept of infinity. The ancient Chinese named this 41st hexagram of the I Ching decrease, which is rather profound because the 41st siddhi is nothing less than a black hole. As you approach it, it begins to pull you into pieces. It sucks in language, it sucks in time, and it even sucks in space. It reduces everything down to nothing. It represents the source of everything. This source has been given so many names by so many different traditions as man has tried to understand it. What is so fascinating about this 41st siddhi is that it is the source underlying all true siddhic states. No matter what manifestation comes through our genetics, they are all ultimately grounded through this siddhi that is not a siddhi. In many ways, this is the nameless siddhi, but we call it emanation because we have no other way of approaching it. There is another interesting point that emerges from deep contemplation of the 41st siddhi. Somewhere deep within your DNA lies a code whose sole purpose is to trigger the state we call enlightenment. In certain vehicles, the body picks up a specific set of secret genetic instructions and triggers the neurological process of enlightenment. It may come as a shock to many mystical seekers that this process cannot be triggered by what we do up on the surface. Within the hologram of the universe, enlightenment is a spontaneous, acausal non-event. You could say that grace triggers this process, but the point is that it is a chemical process and no one knows why or when or to whom it will happen. It is an emanation that simply arises from an unknown source. The one whose body has undergone the process of true enlightenment cannot know how it has happened. Neither can they know to whom it has happened, because no one remains present to experience anything. This siddhi triggers the death of experience itself, which is impossible to comprehend from outside this state. From within this state, there is no underlying agenda. Any manifestations of so-called heightened states of consciousness are meaningless. Bliss is meaningless, ecstasy is meaningless, and God is meaningless. All the other 63 siddhic states are meaningless, since they are all subtle expressions of the prime emanation. From the viewpoint of the 41st siddhi, everything is reduced down to mere physiology, which is why this gene key can be so terrifying for human beings. It makes a mockery of all your efforts, meditation, morality, and systems for understanding life. There is no how within this siddhi. This is the terrifying sentence for us, because it means we can do absolutely nothing to trigger this state, which in turn means that we are utterly helpless. The one in whom the 41st siddhi is made manifest faces a terrible dilemma. If they speak, they know they will speak with an agenda. Even if they do not speak, people will interpret this as another agenda. Such people know that they are trapped. They know that their state can never be communicated, and there is nothing that they say that can help anyone. In fact, whatever they do say will probably be misinterpreted. One thing that can be said about such people is that their state triggers great hunger in others. Whether that is a good thing or not is unknown. All they know is that for them there is no more hunger. They have somehow fallen off the wheel of samsara, and in doing so, there is no longer any pressure to evolve. There is no evolution of consciousness. All evolution is a figment of our imagination and belongs in the domain of samsara itself. In a great final twist, even the 41st siddhi is sucked into the very void from which it emanates, just as the eternal serpent of consciousness, the Ouroboros, is seen endlessly devouring its own tail,